and welcome into another week of the Yinziders podcast. I am Jenna Harner. He's the Athletics Mike DeFabo. We are sadly not in the same room to record this week. I wish we're gonna do this via split screen here instead of sitting next to each other and having fun takes next to each other. Don't worry, we'll still have the fun takes, but just
Yeah,
not.
unfortunately, Jenna has a full-time job. Unfortunately,
He says, unfortunately. I mean, we both have full-time jobs. The Steelers get back in the win column. We'll talk about that win, but first we obviously have to talk about Tuesday's trade deadline. It came and went, and Mike, the Steelers stayed pat. I think this kind of tells us a lot about not only what they think of what they have right now, but the direction this team is looking at a little bit bigger picture moving forward here.
yeah. Well, let's first look at the wide receivers who were traded, and there were two. Jacoby Myers got moved from the Raiders to the Jaguars, and the price tag was a fourth and a sixth round pick. And then the Seahawks acquired Rashid Shaheed from the Saints in exchange for a fourth and a fifth round pick. So there were wide receivers available, Jenna. And the Steelers obviously felt like they didn't want to give up that much draft capital to acquire them. And I think that probably all the Steelers fans out there and people who are listening, it seems based on the reaction I've seen on social media, everyone seems to fall into one of two camps. And they're on polar opposites. On one side, the argument would be Mike Tomlin said last year that the trade deadline is an arms race. And all of the teams that are competitive and are going to be competing for the Super Bowl are making moves to upgrade. And you look at the way the Steelers have the roster constructed right now. They went out and they acquired a 34-year-old Darius Slay. They brought in a 31-year-old Jalen Ramsey. They extended a 31-year-old TJ Watt. They restructured a 36-year-old Cam Hayward. And then on top of it all, they brought in a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. A lot of those moves to me signal Steelers are trying to win right now in the current window. And if that's going to be their approach, to me, it would make sense to give up a fourth and a sixth round pick to acquire a wide receiver who can complement DK Metcalf. And so I certainly understand and feel that side of the argument. Then on the flip side of that discussion, you have people who say, well, this defense has been inconsistent. This team doesn't look like a true contender. They look like a playoff team, but nothing more. And does it make sense to mortgage future assets, especially knowing the Steelers have kind of been stockpiling those picks, and they've got between 8 and 12 picks this year in the draft to move up and get a quarterback. So, Jen, I'm putting you on the spot. You're not usually one for hot takes, but where do you fall within that argument?
First of all, I want to come back to you're a Jaguars guy. Did I know this?
Jaguars. Jaguars.
Jaguars.
No. What do you say?
Jaguars.
Jaguar? Are you British?
No, it's just Jaguars. Like not like the Wire. They yelled at me for that when I got here because I used to
I'm
be a
just a Yins.
Jaguars.
I don't know how to talk right.
But I'll go back to your question. I think I look at it and say the Steelers definitely could have pulled the trigger. And if they, we saw reports that they did inquire on Myers with that trade from the Raiders to the Jags. But to me, I don't know. You can go back and forth. I also think how many times have we heard this front office say consistently, yes, they like the depth and the talent that they have in the wide receiver room currently, knowing, of course, there's a drastic drop off from DK Metcalf to Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, and all the guys that fall under that. But they also have highlighted so many times the tight end group and the versatility of the tight end group and the fact that you have Pat Fryermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward getting as involved as he's been, and Jonnu Smith. Like these guys play. What does Mike Tomlin say? He just does the REC, the receiver, kind of
Yeah,
like
he's
the
saying like
positionless.
they're REC. Yeah. Yeah, because when they make a catch, it just goes in the category of REC. They don't ask what position that player plays. When I look at this, I think that the Steelers' quiet deadline speaks volumes about a couple of things. Their 2026 draft plans, their faith in the young wide receivers, and also what they plan to do going forward with tight end. And so, you know, starting with the quarterback situation, Um, if the Steelers are going to get a quality quarterback in the draft, they're almost certainly going to have to move up. And the bad news for people is you're probably going to have to give up not only a couple mid-round picks, but also a first-round pick if you're going to substantially move up. So at least they might not have all the capital necessary, but they are at least positioned to do that. And so I think that that was part of the thinking. But then when it comes to the wide receiver position itself, Jenna, I was an economics minor at American University. Pretty impressive stuff.
I did know that one. That
And
is
there's
an
something
impressive
in
fun fact.
there's something in economics called opportunity cost. And so when you go to the movies, it doesn't just cost you $20 to go to the movies. It also costs you those 3 hours that you could spend recording the Insiders podcast. And so in a similar way, for the Steelers, they wouldn't have to just fork over whatever compensation it was going to take to get Jacoby Myers. It also was going to come at the expense of playing time for Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson. And so to me, this move might signal like, look, if the Steelers can't find or they don't know that you're going to get an obvious upgrade, that's going to be a clear cut, really solid number two wide receiver, are you giving up draft capital to basically force Calvin Austin out in what's a contract year from him? Are you continuing to delay the development of Roman Wilson? And so, from that standpoint, I think that Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin are huge winners in this. The other thing to consider in this, and you touched on it with the REC thing that Tomlin was talking about, the Steelers have the least wide receiver friendly offense in the entire NFL because they're in 11 personnel, which is one wide receiver, one tight end, and three wide receivers, a league low 33% of snaps. And so DK Metcalf is almost always going to be one of those wide receivers. Calvin Austin is usually one of those guys. And so like that's their base personnel in 12. They're in 12 personnel 35% of the time. And so, like, there's just there aren't a lot of opportunities for wide receivers within this offense. But what I'll also say is that if the Steelers are going to take this approach, I really think that they need to highlight their tight ends as pass catchers. If you're going to lead into this tight end centric kind of offense and you employ Jonnu Smith and Pat Fryermuth, who are both making more than $12 million, they're two of the top 10 highest paid tight ends in the league. Their production has to be commensurate with their compensation. And right now, Jonnu Smith ranks 26th in receptions among tight ends. Fryermuth is 31st. Fryermuth ranks 26th among receiving yards. Jonnu Smith is 35th. So if you're going to be paying two tight ends like their top 10 players at their position, I think you have to be getting them the ball like they're two of the top 10 players at their position.
And something really interesting of note too, kind of with all this talk around the league on the trade deadline itself, was you look at teams that you consider contenders right now in the AFC, particularly. The Colts really were the only team out of the teams that you say, hey, these are the top teams. Chargers too, I guess, but like the Colts made the big splashy move in getting Sauce Gardner. The Bills didn't make moves. The Chiefs didn't make moves. Chargers make a small move, two small moves. But this wasn't kind of the, as Mike Tomlin had talked about, in the arm race thing, good teams do things to get better. You look at it, the way that it shook out this year, and particularly in the AFC and the competition the Steelers are going to be facing if they want to see that road to a playoff win, divisional win, the conference championship, however far you think this team is going to go. The other teams they're competing with against didn't really make those massive splashing moves aside from the Colts too. So it was just like an interesting way the day kind of all fell, especially, looking at the Bills. I know they were looking big receiver heavy. There was chatter potentially about Deebo Samuel, but at the end of the day, the contenders, the Colts were really the only ones within the AFC that you look on paper and say, hey, they drastically got better. Again, the Chargers adding offensive line help as well because they've been depleted in that area. Let's talk Steelers defense. We'll push the trade deadline talk off to the side for a little while. Steelers defense coming back in a massive way in that game against the Colts, going after three consecutive games without forcing a turnover. They create all the splash in the absolute world. Is this defense back though? Mike, can you look at this and say like this defense is definitely back?
It's so tough because I feel like the Steelers defense, when they force turnovers and they stop the run and they get after the quarterback, they look like one of the best defenses in the NFL. And it's going to be difficult for any team. I mean, they just played the NFL's best offense and they completely shut them down because they would force turnovers. At the same time, I think that you still have questions about, you know, what is this defense going to be when the opponent takes care of the football? And are they going to be able to stop teams on three downs? But, I did like a couple of the schematic things that the Steelers did differently. First and foremost, they brought in Kyle Duggar. He had two practices with the Steelers, and he jumped right in and played virtually 100% of the snaps. And when they lost to Sean Elliott, they lost a guy who's a physical run stuffer who can play in the box. And a guy of that caliber is difficult to replace. And so they were smart that they made a schematic adjustment instead of playing single high coverage, which, over the last couple of years, they've been one of the highest rates of single high coverage in the league. They went to predominantly a two high shell. And I think that that was good because you're using players in ways that fit their strengths, especially Jalen Ramsey. I mean, he's not going to be an in the box kind of guy. And when he's playing, a half field type of zone coverage, he's suited to do that. So I like that schematic adjustment. The other schematic adjustment that I liked was there were times when they were running basically what looked like a 4-3. And I think sometimes it was a 4-3. And sometimes I think it was also like a big nickel with Peyton Wilson basically as that safety that would be the nickel in a big nickel. And sometimes he was aligned like over the slot, including on the time when he came on the blitz, had the deflected pass that Jack Sawyer caught. And so by going to that different personnel package, they were able to put Malik Harrison on the field, bigger, tougher, more physical inside linebacker who can help you against the run, which was really important against Jonathan Taylor. But you also were able to keep Peyton Wilson, one of the fastest guys who's going to be on the field in any situation, on the field. And then by blitzing him and doing other things like that, you highlighted the things that make him a unique player. So um, after, we criticized and ripped apart Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin for their schematics and the way that they've been doing things, they made adjustments to their credit, and I think that they absolutely worked.
And you made this point on the final word this past weekend on Sunday after the game, and I just loved it. The fact that this was a game too. Yes, you had the TJ Watts of the world, the Alex Highsmiths of the world making big plays, but a lot of young guys that they need this production from. Peyton Wilson, Jack Sawyer, Nick Herbig still just making impacts. These young guys really had a big impact on what happened defensively in this game. And I think that's, to me, something that if they're going to look to sustain what they did against the Colts, against the Chargers this week, you're going to have those contributions from those guys because I don't think many teams, including the Chargers, are going to say, hey, we're going to just TJ Watt can go one on one. We're just going to give TJ Watt one on one matchups. I don't see that happening this week.
Yeah, I think that was a good game for a lot of these young guys. And Keanu Benton also, he had a sack. And I think that he played really well in the middle of that defensive front. And that was a big part of it. Derek Harmon hopped on a loose ball. Um, so, Joey Porter Jr., he's still young and he had an interception. So a lot of these guys, like the way that I'll phrase it is or frame it, we talk so much about this being an old and expensive defense. The only way to change that is by drafting and developing young talent. And so I think that that was one of the most encouraging things is that you saw some of these young playmakers on the defensive side of the ball make an impact. It also was just a great game from the edge tandem of TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. You know, uh, people keep, everyone wants to see more Nick Herbig, and I understand that thought process. I think he's fantastic in one-dimensional pass rush situations, and I think that somebody, whether it's the Steelers or somebody else, is going to pay him a boatload of money to be a starter next season. That said, you saw in the most recent game why the Steelers play Alex Highsmith as much as they do. I mean, he brought down Jonathan Taylor, I think, the first or second play of the game behind the line of scrimmage. and he was very impactful against the run. And not to mention, he had a sack of his own, a strip sack, and then TJ Watt just not only did he create the fumble and the sack that really changed the momentum of the game. As I was watching back through the film, there were so many examples of his mere presence helping everybody around him. So there was a time when they brought Brandon Eccles on a blitz, and I love the way that they did it. They brought him through the B gap so that then when TJ Watt is rushing wide, that B gap is just completely vacated and he was able to come right in. It was a simulated pressure too, which I'm a big fan of, where they dropped a couple guys out and brought the additional rush guy in Brandon Eccles. So that was an instance where TJ Watt's mere presence ended up leading to a quick, poor decision. And then the other time was on Peyton Wilson's interception. The tight end, or not the tight end, the running back had to stay in to chip TJ. And the Steelers were in man coverage, and it looked like Peyton Wilson was responsible for the running back. But because the running back was delayed getting out into the flat, Peyton Wilson didn't have to rush out there. He kind of settled down, acted on his instincts, read the quarterback's eyes, and Daniel Jones threw the ball right to him. The reason why I think it looked like the ball was thrown right to him is because Daniel Jones expected Peyton Wilson to be out in the flat with the running back, but because the running back was slow getting there because he had to help on TJ. So again, TJ's forced fumble clearly makes an impact. The blitz that I mentioned, where he's opening up the B gap for a blitzer, and then the play, the Peyton Wilson interception, where because the Colts had to allocate extra resources to blocking TJ Watt, it allowed Peyton Wilson to kind of hang out and freelance a little bit and read the eyes of the quarterback.
Now, I feel like we'd be a little bit remiss if we didn't talk about the Steelers offense because things weren't going well in the early portions of the Colts game. And you did feel up until that TJ Watt strip sack fumble recovery that this was going to be much like the two prior games that we had seen compared to what we ended up seeing against Indy. I, I liked the way the offense was able to respond. I really do when they were able to capitalize on turnovers. They got 24 of their 27 points in the win off of those turnovers. You're scoring touchdowns, not field goals, a big step from the Green Bay loss. But what do you see that you need them to sustain a little bit more? What more do you need to see from your offense? Is it just or from the offense? Is it just consistency? I think that's where my brain goes, where I just want to see this offense have a little more consistency and not have those plays, not have drives killed by penalties or, like the first drive of the game, a perfect pass to Jonnu Smith. That was a phenomenal play call. I loved the design. And he drops it, and all of a sudden they're behind the chains, behind the sticks.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, guys have to catch the ball when it's thrown in their direction. Drops have started to become an epidemic right now for the Steelers offense. And then the other big thing to me is just having a reliable running game. And it's been kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde performance from the run game. Like it was non existent through the first 3 weeks of the season. They go to Dublin. They start leaning into the heavy personnel package with Spencer Anderson as the extra offensive lineman. All of a sudden, all of their stats improve dramatically. They seem to find an identity for the first couple weeks. And then beginning with the Packers, well, no, the Packers, beginning with, yeah, the Packers, the Steelers made themselves one dimensional by getting away from the run. And then in this most recent game, they just didn't have the sustained success on the ground. I will say that I kind of give the Steelers credit because if they had just abandoned the run and only thrown the football, it could have been a really long day. You had to manage time of possession. Even if you didn't win time of possession, you just couldn't lose it in a dramatic way. And so by running the football, even though it wasn't very productive, they were still able to get some things done. So, I think if you look at the Steelers offense right now, they've been very good at capitalizing in the red zone, but it's a matter of how do you sustain success through the 20s? And I think that's where the running game really comes in. I think that the best Steelers offense that we've seen this year comes when they run the ball effectively between the 20s and then they count on Aaron Rodgers and that quick release and that precision passing in the red zone.
And I feel like you see bursts of it. You see Jalen Warren ripping off a couple good runs during games. Kenneth Gainwell, I thought, had a couple really nice ones against the Colts. But again, it's that sustained aspect of it where, can they get this going? Can they continue to run the football? Obviously, a big part of that too is Isaac Sayamalu and his health, something we'll be watching this week too, so that they can bring in a little bit of that heavy package, that jumbo package, if you will. When we come back on the Insiders, our friend, the Athletics' Daniel Popper, who covers the Chargers, is going to be joining us to break down this matchup. We are looking forward to that. Don't go anywhere. This is the Insiders.
And welcome back to the Insiders. Now we welcome in a very special guest. He covers the Chargers for the Athletic, the one and only DJ Daniel Popper. And I say that because you also, in your spare time, are also a DJ.
Yeah. Yeah, I do music production. Well, first off, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I mean, it sounds like you've been doing broadcast introductions for decades. So I just want to applaud you on that. I feel very welcomed. But yeah, I do. My hobby is music production. So I spend more time like actually making beats and music than actually DJing. But in another life, I would have been headlining Ultra.
Yeah. Well, you know what we need right now is we need a couple of your tracks to use as like the bump tracks between segments or as our intro music. I don't know. Maybe we could work out some kind of financial agreement on the side after we finish recording.
I don't even need any money, man. I do it for the love of the game. So I'm happy to send you all of my IDs that I've been trying to send to labels and getting rejected for like 3 years now. So happy to send
Mike
them.
We'll get you.
Mike has shown them to me. Your stuff's pretty good. Your stuff's really good. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And our dog is our dog is also a big fan of electronic and EDM. So I think that he would be a big fan of your stuff as well. But let's jump into this football matchup. When I look at this, Steelers, they just created 6 turnovers, and they did it largely because of their talented edge tandem of TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. And you can also throw Nick Herbig into that conversation. They're going up against the Chargers, who lost 2, not 1, but 2 starting offensive tackles. To me, that looks like the matchup where the Steelers have the clear advantage. How are the Chargers going to deal with the situation that they've lost, 2 very talented guys on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a complete nightmare for the Chargers. Starting back in training camp in August, Rashawn Slater signs a market-setting contract extension, and 7 days later ruptures his patellar tendon on a freak play in practice. He's done for the season. They felt like they had some depth. They were able to move Joe Alt, the first-round pick last year, from the right side to the left side to play left tackle. Joe Alt had a high ankle sprain earlier this season, missed 3 games, came back in week 8, week 9. He hurts the ankle again. He's having surgery. He's done for the season. So the entire strategy of this offense, of this football team, was going to be built through these tackles who they thought were the best tackle duo in the league, and that's gone up in flames. And then you can also talk about some of these injuries they've had behind those two. Trey Pipkins, who's played a lot of tackle in the NFL, former 3rd-round pick, he entered the lineup at right tackle. He's been battling a knee injury and has missed time. Jamari Salyer, who has played tackle in the NFL and is sort of a swing tackle guard for them, he's been out with a knee injury. They traded for Austin Deculus in August with the Texans. He's been battling an ankle injury. They signed Bobby Hart off the street, who hadn't started since 2021. He's giving them functional play at right tackle in the first quarter on Sunday against the Titans. He suffers a groin injury and an ankle injury on the same play. So the injuries have been outrageous. And then you also go to Mekhi Becton, their marquee free agent signing, who has been in and out of the lineup. He's only played 51.7% of the snaps. He's missed time with food poisoning. He's missed time with a concussion. He's missed time with a hand injury. He's missed time with a knee injury. And so it's just been a revolving door at every position outside of center and left guard. Bradley Bozeman, their starting center. Zion Johnson, their starting left guard. And the pass protection has been very poor as a result, which is understandable to a degree. Justin Herbert's been hit 80 times this season, 13 more than the quarterback in second, who's Cam Ward. He's been pressured on over 40% of his dropbacks, and he's been hit on 21.2% of his dropbacks. So 1 out of every 5 times Justin Herbert is dropping back to pass, he's taking a hit, and a lot of these are quick pressures where he is just getting crushed, and you start to wonder, how sustainable it is over the course of the season. So the Chargers made a trade today ahead of the deadline to bring in Trevor Penning. Pipkins is working his way back. Salyer is working his way back. Austin Deculus is working his way back. So they're going to try and piece it together. But I would say advantage to the Pittsburgh Steelers in that matchup that you referenced, Mike.
Yeah, and the other part of this is, Harbaugh kind of has an identity as a football coach. And a lot of it centers around running the football, whether you're talking about his days at Stanford or Michigan at the college level, or you're talking about the 49ers or now with the Chargers. They're one of those teams that comes out with heavy personnel groupings. Like they're going to do multiple tight ends, a fullback, and they're going to want to run the football. But you just detailed all of the injuries on the offensive line. They also lost Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton. So what is the state of the running game when they have so many injuries up front and also to the guys that are carrying the football themselves?
Yeah, that's another part of this injury saga. Najee Harris, obviously a former Steeler, ruptures his Achilles on another freak play where it's a movement he's done thousands of times in his career, takes a step out of the backfield and ruptures his Achilles. Omarion Hampton, who had looked fantastic in his rookie season, on another freak play, he's running to the flat off play action, gets kicked in the ankle, and now he's going to be out through the bye week. And you can also throw in their third running back who made the 53-man, Hassan Haskins, is on IR with a hamstring injury. So all three of the running backs that made the 53-man are on injured reserve right now. So Kamani Vidal, 6th-round pick last year, has been carrying the load. He's had some bright moments, like against the Dolphins and Vikings. He's had some down moments, like this past week against the Titans when they couldn't really run the football. So at times it's been good, but a lot of it was centered around Joe Alt. They were using him as a weapon in the run game. The run blocking was a thing of beauty for a football nerd like myself behind Big 76 on the left side. Without him in the lineup, they're just not very consistent running the football. So in reality, what they've done is pivot to their strengths, and what they have is an all-world quarterback in Justin Herbert who can do pretty much anything you want a quarterback to do on the field. He's been running a lot more. He's 1 yard shy of his career high in rushing yards. So he's been scrambling, and they've been factoring him in the run game as well. And then their receivers are really the strength of the offensive roster. They brought Keenan Allen back. Quentin Johnson has taken a step. Lad McConkey, rookie Trey Harris has done some nice things. So, because of the inconsistency with the running game, because of the pass protection, when they've been able to function amid these offensive line injuries, it's been a lot of quick game, getting the ball out and taking advantage of some matchups in the short and intermediate area with these receivers. And then you can also throw rookie tight end Rondé Gadsden in that mix as well, who has really emerged as a difference maker in the passing game. So I don't know if they can rely on this running game. Kamani Vidal has shown some flashes, but he hasn't been consistent enough when he's gotten the opportunity to play. So between these offensive line injuries and injuries at running back, it feels like the way they're going to have to function is put the ball in Justin Herbert's hands, get the ball out quickly. If you can stay on schedule with some of this quick game stuff, try and attack the deep part of the field off, play action shot plays where you're really protecting it up front with max protection, and something they did in the Dolphins game with some success. But it's not an ideal situation. It's not an ideal situation. You can't pass protect, you can't run block, and you don't really have a difference maker at running back. And so you kind of have to lean into your strengths, in my opinion.
And you mentioned obviously Herbert and the impact that he has. And you go back to this matchup a season ago when Herbert was dealing with that ankle injury. He was much more immobile than he was. The Steelers, Mike Tomlin said earlier this week that they were able to do some different things schematically because of the lack of mobility. And now it seems clearly like the Chargers are just relying on that so much to get what they want going offensively. Also, like you mentioned too, in the pass game, just how much of an arsenal of weapons is there in not only what Herbert can do on the ground, but like all of the guys that you mentioned. I mean, Mike Tomlin was mentioning just, he tends to do this often where he'll list a lot of the main key playmakers on every team, and you're like, okay, here's the entire roster. But it does like that to me seems like if this matchup is going to be won by the Chargers, they're going to have to exploit the Steelers in the secondary with these pass catchers and the weapons that they have offensively.
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point. I don't think Justin Herbert should have been playing in that game in week 3 of last year. It was like a dangerous situation. He ended up leaving the game. And I wrote after the game, like, who in this organization is going to protect Justin Herbert from himself? Because he's such a warrior and he's so tough that he's going to try and play through whatever he's dealing with. But to play a week after suffering a high ankle sprain, I thought was a mistake, and ended up coming to fruition because he really couldn't protect himself back there. But I will say this. Mike Tomlin's not going to forget what Justin Herbert did to the Steelers earlier in his career, 2021 on Sunday Night Football, when he ran for 90-plus yards. And I remember watching Mike Tomlin's press conference ahead of that game last year when he mentioned it. I'm sure it's on his mind. He is very aware of what kind of athlete Justin Herbert is. But that is the strength of the team right now, is put the ball in Justin's hands and allow him to make decisions, to create with his legs, to pick up first downs with his legs, and to try and take advantage of some of the matchups they have with these receivers. It's a different kind of offense than last year when they really had like one guy that they could rely on to consistently beat man coverage, and that was Ladd McConkey. This year they have a number of different options, and it's affecting the way that defenses are playing them. You know, you can double Keenan Allen on third down over the middle of the field and try and take away his two-way goes out of the slot. But if you do that, you're going to be one-on-one on the outside with Quentin Johnston. You're going to be one-on-one with Ladd McConkey. You're going to be one-on-one with Oronde Gadsden. And I feel like all of those guys can win matchups. I think the big question in this game, you know, alluding to maybe some of the deficiencies with the Steelers secondary, is like, can the Chargers protect enough to actually take advantage of those situations? And you can have the best receivers in the world, and you can have a great group, and you can feel like you can win some of these one-on-one matchups. But if pressure's getting home in 2.5 seconds, that does not matter. So how are the Chargers going to attack this game schematically to maybe try and stay on schedule? And then when they do have opportunities to max protect and play action fake, can they take advantage of those and create some explosive plays when they do try and add those wrinkles into the offensive game plan?
You
You know,
mentioned
as
that
you're talking about,
2021
go
game.
ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. Oh, I was saying you mentioned that 2021 game. I vividly remember we were there covering that game, and just Cam Hayward is just booking it down
Yeah,
the field after Herbert, and he eventually caught up, which was just insane for the athleticism at that point, considering Herbert versus Hayward. But
I remember that. Yeah.
like that's one picture I cannot get out of my brain with that game.
Yeah, and he's added speed. Justin has added speed. He's worked a lot on his long speed. He's been running sprints at practices starting, you know, over the summer in training camp, and he's willing. Like, they have asked him to be more of a runner, and he has taken that to heart, and he's going to absolutely fly past his career high in rushing yards. And so in a game like this, it's going to be managing the pocket and, you know, trying to create with his legs, because, you know, from where I stand, I just don't see this protection being able to hold up, you know, when they do get into some of these known pass situations.
Yeah, yeah. As you're describing this, I think that the biggest question mark for the Steelers defense is how do they handle some of this quick game stuff? Because they're not long removed from the game against Cincinnati when they gave up, 16 receptions, a new franchise record to Jamar Chase. And so much of that was just quick slants. Just get the ball out of Joe Flacco's hands. And similarly, against the Packers, they were running some really basic stuff. Like, let's just get Tucker Kraft into the flat, get him the football, let him create yards after the catch. And he had, I think, the most productive yards after the catch performance in years from a tight end. So, like, the Steelers, and then this other problem for the Steelers is they give up a fair number of explosive plays. So for me, it's like, are the Steelers any better at handling some of this quick game stuff? And are they able to then bring down these guys? Because, Ladd McConkey and others, I think, are pretty good with the ball in their hands. And the Steelers have been kind of inconsistent in terms of bringing guys down and turning a 5-yard catch into a 5-yard catch instead of a 5-yard catch and run that turns into a 35-yard gain. Let's flip over to the other side of the ball, because last year the Chargers had one of the NFL's best defenses. And I remember earlier this year, Jenna grew up a Giants fan, and Jackson Dart was making his first ever start, and he was doing it against the Chargers. And I was saying to her, like, man, that's a hell of a test for a young quarterback. Just throw him to the wolves. But it went pretty well for him. So how would you describe the current state of the Chargers defense, especially compared to what we saw last year?
Yeah, I think in that Giants game specifically, they just let Dart get going early. That he was able to get activated with his legs, scrambling and, with some of the designed rushing stuff. And as a result, he's the type of quarterback where when he gets a little bit of confidence, he's going to be able to attack and lead an offense. And I think that's what you saw in that game. They tightened things up in the second half, but that early drive where Dart actually scored a touchdown to cap it off, I think gave him a lot of confidence. It's not the same unit as last year. They went through a pretty tough spell, week 5 through week 7 that 3-game stretch, culminating in a blowout loss to the Colts, where just fundamentally they were not where they needed to be. And that was the big issue for me. Jesse Minter, defensive coordinator, has these things he calls separators, which are like the fundamental components of defense: block destruction, communication, effort and angles, etc. They were not physical or violent enough up front. They couldn't set the edge, which was partly related to Khalil Mack being out. And then their communication on the back end was horrible, which is something you didn't really see a lot last year. You had guys with their eyes in the wrong place. And some of that was, they were giving up plays. And as a result, guys were really trying to, make that play that could change the course of how the defense was playing. And as a result, you had guys out of position. The last couple of weeks, things have tightened up. They played really well against the Vikings in that Thursday night football game in week 8, blowout win. And then they only gave up 6 points to the Titans. The final score could be a little bit misleading, but there was a pick six in that game and a punt return touchdown, which contributed to the 20 points. So I think they found their footing a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Khalil Mack returned in week 7 against the Colts, but was limited to 12 snaps. He's been playing a more full-time role over the last 2 weeks. They also traded for Odafe Owe last month from the Ravens, and they're kind of getting closer to what they had last year with Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Tuli Tuipulotu with their edge rushers. Now they can get into some of these 3 edge rusher packages and try and create some matchups on the interior, particularly with Tuli Tuipulotu, who's great rushing from a standing position over the guard. So I think that side of the ball is tightening up, and we've seen that over the last couple weeks. Obviously, a little bit of a different challenge against Aaron Rodgers as compared to whatever the Titans are on offense, and Carson Wentz with only one shoulder. But it feels like they're finding their form a little bit. Different test here, though, against the Steelers coming up.
So the Steelers, their offense, I think, is pretty easy to summarize. So, like, basically through the first 3 weeks of the season, it was quick game, get the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands before, the pass rush can affect him, get it to DK Metcalf, create yards after the catch. And overall, that's kind of their philosophy. Like right now, they're getting the ball out of Rodgers' hands quicker than pretty much any other team. They're throwing it shorter than any other team, and they're producing more yards after the catch than just about any other team. Then beginning week 4 in Dublin, they started to go to these heavy personnel groupings with an extra offensive lineman, and that opened up the running game a little bit. And then they started to have that necessary balance. And then really only in one game against the Browns did we see the Steelers take advantage of single high coverage and throw the ball deep to DK Metcalf. But it's been pretty inconsistent when it comes to throwing it deep. So when you hear that description of, the Steelers offense, specifically the quick game stuff, how do you feel like the Chargers match up specifically against that kind of brand of offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can get after the Chargers on the ground. So if I was game planning against them, I'd probably start there. And they've had a little bit of difficulty defending the run in nickel packages and in light boxes. Like structurally, this defense plays a ton of light boxes because they're playing a lot of too high safety coverages. That's kind of the identity of the defense. And so in order to defend the run properly with some of these 6-man boxes, you have to have really physical interior players, and you have to be able to set the edge. And particularly on the interior, they haven't been super consistent in terms of how they've been, destroying blocks, to use their terminology. So, what you can do is try and run against some of these light boxes, force the Chargers to get into base packages, which they don't want to be in, because when they're in nickel, they can play Derwin James in the slot at nickel and go with RJ Mickens and Elijah Molden at safety. And when they can get Derwin James in the slot at nickel, they can blitz him, they can get him close to the ball, he can impact the game in a bunch of different areas. When they get into base packages, they have to play Derwin at safety, and if they're going to get to some of these too high looks at a base, he's got to be in the deep part of the field. So if I was attacking this defense, I would, presume they're going to come out with a decent amount of nickel, try and run against their nickel packages and force them to get into base, which is what they don't want to be in, and that way you can try and limit the way that Derwin James affects the game. But if they are able to defend the run out of nickel, then they can start to get creative with how they use Derwin James, and they can get really creative in terms of some of the disguises. When this defense is at its best, you're seeing tons of post-snap rotation, you're seeing a vast variety of coverages, and you're trying to bait the quarterback into throws with some of these trap coverages and blitzes. And if they can't get into those types of things because they're forced to play base, then it becomes a much less dynamic defense.
As you're describing this, reminds me of a conversation with Arthur Smith. Everyone knows that he's like the NFL's most tight end friendly offensive coordinator. But the way he explains it is he doesn't just do that because he likes the tight end. He does it because he likes to dictate what personnel grouping or what personnel package the defense is in.
Yeah.
And so he sometimes will put 13 personnel on the field just for the singular purpose of being like, we know that we're forcing them into base.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much that's going to be part of it. And then, as you're describing that they haven't been great at stopping the run, again, when they're in nickel, I wonder if the Steelers might also do a little bit of the spread you out to run the football kind of approach as well. So it'll be an interesting cat and mouse game in terms of what personnel groupings Arthur Smith sends onto the field. And maybe if his intentions are actually like, hey, we're going big to run the ball, or we're going big to throw it, or we're going, smaller grouping to run it. Well, so there's a lot of kind of layers to that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I personally feel like they're going to go heavy, force the Chargers into base and try and get the run game going, because it feels like, they're able to operate the way they want to operate in those situations, because then you can get into heavy packages, get into your play action game, and try and attack deep in that way.
I want to ask, we've kind of been asking all of our the opponent's beat writers this question, but the Chargers win this game if, you can answer the rest of that.
Yeah. To me, it's staying on schedule on offense. Like, that's the number one most important thing. So, Greg Roman and Steelers fans will be familiar with him. Like, he can scheme up the run game. And if they can just be functional running the football, avoid negative plays, and stay in second and third and manageable, then they can get into some of this quick game stuff, and they can avoid the situations that could be catastrophic for them. And that, to me, is the most important thing. So that includes avoiding penalties, which had been a problem for this offense earlier this season. What they cannot be doing is 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, situations where Justin Herbert's going to have to drop back and then allowing these edge rushers to take over the game. So however they want to do it schematically, offensively, they have to stay on schedule. They have to stay ahead of the sticks. If the game script goes in the opposite direction, they're going to have a really, really tough time protecting Justin Herbert, moving the football, and, preventing some of these catastrophic plays, whether it be sacks, interceptions, etc.
I don't know, Mike, if you were jumping in here. I was waiting. You're jumping in off the next one. Awkward pause. We will edit that out.
Don't edit it.
All right. And
I'm not going to edit it out because I'm the one that has to edit it today, so it's not getting edited out.
He does the introductions and he edits. What can he do?
What the man can do it all, truly. If we'll talk on the flip side too, kind of basically just not saying the inverse of what you just said, but the Steelers win this game if.
Yeah, I mean, if the edge rushers can impact it, and then I think offensively, what we were sort of just talking about as far as, being able to run the ball, like that's how I would attack this defense. Like, I would come out in heavy personnel, which, from what you guys are saying is part of the identity of what this team does. Come out in heavy personnel and try and run it all day and see if the Chargers are up for it, on the edges and particularly on the interior. And, if they can physically dominate the game in the run game offensively, I think that's a way and a pathway for the Steelers to win the game.
We'll have to see what happens. Jenna, go ahead and outro him since you're the pro.
I'll say now I'll do the outro. You do the intro. I'll return the favor here. Daniel, we appreciate your time and your insight. Let our listeners, audience members know where they can find you, follow you, and read all of the awesome content that you provide.
Yeah, so on The Athletic, athletic.com/team/Chargers. You can follow me on Twitter at Daniel R. Popper. And I also do a podcast on Substack, hopswithpop.substack.com. The name comes from, I have a beer with the podcast. So Hops with Pop.
Just one?
Just one. Just one beer. And when the beer is done, the stream is done.
What kind of beer guy are you? IPAs?
Oh, I'm all over the map. It depends what side of the bed I wake up in the morning. I used to be more of an IPA guy, but I'm getting too old, honestly. So usually it's a Michelob Ultra because, I've realized in the last 2 to 3 years how many calories I'm taking in through these IPAs. But I like a good sour. I like a good Pilsner. It all does the job,
Hey, maybe you'll get a game in Ireland. You can split some G's out there. We did a little bit of that when the Steelers played in Dublin. So
I was
We did
hopefully,
a
hoping
lot
for
of
a
it.
Europe game. I was hoping for a Europe game. Ended up in Brazil instead, which was a great experience. I had a wonderful time, but the 12-hour flight was not fun.
You didn't get the
oh,
food poisoning though. That
I didn't.
who you didn't
Mackay
get that.
Becton did. Mackay Becton did.
Mackay Becton was, though. I was like, I remember seeing that post. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah. Well, my wife texted me immediately. She's like, "It's like Bridesmaids." I'm like, "Yeah, it kind of is like Bridesmaids." No, but I did. I hit the Brazilian barbecue. I had chicken livers and all sorts of crazy stuff, and probably not my best decision, but it was tasty.
No, I mean, when in Brazil, when in
When
Brazil,
in
when in
Sao
Rome, when in
Paulo,
Brazil,
right?
same
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when in
yeah.
Sao Paulo. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. We appreciate all of your time again and you providing all this insight. We will see you in LA later this weekend, and we will be right back on the Insiders. And welcome back to the Insiders podcast. It's time now for Zeke's picks with a very cozy. I can't tell if he's like half sleeping. Zeke over there. Oh, he just heard his name. He said, I am not asleep. No, no. I am ready for some gambling picks. This is what it takes. This is how you wake Zeke up from a nap. You just say, hey, you ready to gamble? And he says, yes, I'm in.
I
So we'll
think he's still struggling with daylight savings time. Poor guy. Oh my God, look how tired he is.
Man has no idea what time it is. Zeke, it's time for your picks, though. We'll start off Thursday night football. The Raiders are going to Mile High for a matchup with the Denver Broncos. Zeke, who do you have?
He's yawning. I think he says it's going to be a snooze fest, and he expects the Denver Broncos to put a whooping on the struggling Las Vegas Raiders.
Zeke, I like that pick. He just licked his lips at that pick, so I think he really. Oh my God. I don't think
This
I've
is
ever.
probably hilarious for people who just like listen to this on Spotify on their way to work. If that's you, sometime just for fun, go onto YouTube and watch the video, and you can see how cute and adorable our dog is.
He just yawned like 5 times in a row. That was magical. um, let's start with the AFC North matchup that I think is going to be much more intriguing than it was a week ago. And Zeke's getting up for this intrigue. The Ravens head to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. This is interesting to me here. Zeke, who you got?
Zeke, who do you like, Raiders or Minnesota?
Who's he
I
going
think
with?
I think that he's going with the Ravens. I think that he feels like Lamar Jackson is on a roll right now. He came back. The Ravens are feeling good, but he thinks it's going to be a pretty close game because JJ McCarthy has come back and he's starting to play pretty well.
Yeah, Minnesota, of course, pulling that big upset over Detroit that really hurt me in our pick'em. I think it also hurt you. Zeke, did it hurt you too? That's okay. I don't know a lot of. I think Vikings fans really were probably the only ones, and maybe some other smart people. This game got a whole lot more interesting following the trade deadline. The Browns go to the New York Jets this weekend. Zeke, who you got?
Um, he said that he loves the Browns in this one because not only are the Jets straight ass, but now they've got like multiple members of their team that wanted to be traded that weren't traded. Guys probably upset that some of their best friends and teammates just got moved. Um, when you make that number of significant trades and get rid of that many talented players, how can you possibly stay engaged and motivated if you're still a player on that team? I just feel like right now the Jets are going to be circling the drain. I think that they're done and destined for the number one overall pick.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And they have multiple first rounders after all was said and done with everything. This game, I think, might be the most interesting to me. And I cannot wait to watch this in the morning when we're out on the West Coast. The Patriots go to Tampa to take on the Buccaneers. Zeke, are you going with the Patriots or are you going with the Bucks? Because I don't know how I feel about this game. I don't.
Zeke likes the Bucks in this game. because they're at home. He thinks that this
Yep.
is going to be a 3-point game. If the Patriots were home, he would have gone with the Patriots. But I think he's going to go with Baker Mayfield. He's a big fan of him, dating back to his days with the Browns. Everyone gave up hope in Baker Mayfield. Zeke never lost hope for a second. So I think that he's going to ride with Baker and the boys.
Zeke never lost hope. The Bengals on the bye. I forgot to mention that. So they're the AFC North team that is not in action. We'll do the Monday night matchup and then we'll end things with the Steelers. But the Monday night matchup, the Eagles at the Packers. Zeke, you seemed to shake your head against the Packers there. That seemed like I can't pick them and I'm really sad about it, but look at them.
Zeke is distraught. He just shook his head no. I think that he's like, why did the Packers come to Pittsburgh and beat the Steelers and then fall apart against the Carolina Panthers? What is that all about?
Yeah.
It's so weird because like I always like to believe that sometimes the better team doesn't win, the more desperate team wins, and so I feel like the Packers are kind of primed for that bounce back. But I don't know. What do you think?
The lights are back on, in case you were wondering. If all of our viewers saw, the lights just went off on me. Yeah, I think the Tucker Craft injury spells a lot worse for this Packers offense and for what they want to do. I think the Eagles made what they want to accomplish this season very apparent in the way that they made it an absolute point that they were not trading AJ Brown, no matter what, considering all of the talk that had happened over the early portions of the season. But to me, I just think Green Bay's been dealing with so many injuries. I think they're a phenomenal team when healthy, but I think being bitten by the injury bug in the way that they are, the Eagles, to me, win this game. Zeke, we got one more. I just need you to wake
Hey,
up for
Zeke,
one more, and it's the Steelers.
Zeke, Zeke, wake up.
Are you not? Are you not picking this game? Are you staying away? Are we keeping you awake? I want to let the people know too. We're recording this. It's 8:30 in the evening. We would not be doing this and keeping Zeke up till 1 a.m. or waking him up at 5 a.m. to make his picks. We love our animal. We really do. Steelers at the Chargers. Zeke, are you going with the Steelers to make it 2 in a row and put themselves in a really solid position in the AFC in terms of that playoff race? Or do you think LA has enough firepower and we know what happens when the Chargers go west or when the Steelers go West Coast? Who you got, Zeke?
Zeke said that he was listening to Daniel Popper, and Pop's pessimism led to Zeke's optimism. He is going with the Steelers in this one. He changed his mind. Initially, he thought that the Chargers at home, he thought that their talented edge rushers were going to give the Steelers problems. Their talented defense was going to keep the scoring down. But given all the injuries to the Chargers offensive linemen, he's changed his mind. He's going with the Steelers in this one. Now, this doesn't come from me. This is from Zeke. This is my analysis now. I think this is a huge game for the Steelers because when you look at it right now, like it could very well come down to the third and final playoff spot, wild card spot between the Steelers and the Chargers. And so this specific head-to-head matchup, I'm not overstating things when I say this could determine whether the Steelers make the playoffs as a wild card or don't. I think that that's not an exaggeration to any degree because you look at it like in the AFC East, you're going to have the Patriots and you're going to have the Bills making it. In the AFC North, maybe one team. In the AFC West, you could have 3 teams making it. In the AFC South, probably just the Colts, one team. And so, I think it's going to come down to, is it going to be 2 teams from the AFC North get in and one of those being the Steelers, or is it going to be 3 teams from the AFC West?
And Zeke doesn't want to think about that because he had the Ravens running away with this division for a bet very early in the season, and he doesn't like how it looks right now. There's still time, of course. Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us for this week's edition of the Yinziders podcast. And we want to thank some of the reviews. I want to give a shout out to Mike from Kansas, who gave us arguably the greatest review of all time. I'm going to read it because it was that spectacular. Mike left this review, I believe, on Apple Podcasts. He said, I've met 3 people who didn't love this show, a Browns fan, an avowed communist, and someone who pours them milk before the cereal. Suffice to say, not company anyone ought to keep. The levity and chemistry between the two is probably expectable, but when balanced with the legitimate journalistic chops, makes for a fun and informative listen. So if you're someone who loves losing football clubs, laughably incoherent economic policy, or the general degenerate and uncouth action of filling a bowl with milk prior to adding your Reese's Puffs, skip this one. Otherwise, enjoy civilized society with us as we tune into the Yinziders. So, Mike, we want to thank you for leaving that review. And if you feel similarly and you want to leave us a review, leave us a 5-star rating. We would love that. We really enjoy being able to do this every week and bring you guys a bunch of fun content. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, The Yinziders. We are also on YouTube. Mike is at Mike DeFabo on Twitter. I'm at Jenna Harner 11 on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.